Hey guys, welcome to this new comparison video, or new comparison video series rather, because in this video we're going to compare my Diezel VH4 to the Line 6 Helix Stadium XL, and in future episodes I'm going to do other platforms like the Fractal stuff, the Quad Cortex, Tonex, etc. And this is going to be a lot of fun. Now, why am I going to do the VH4 in this series? Well, let me tell you. First of all, I love this amplifier so much. It's just a really cool amplifier, especially Channel 3, the legendary Channel 3, which, you know, James Hetfield is known for using, Adam Jones from Tool, the guy from Muse, etc., etc. So we're going to do Channel 3 of the VH4. Not only do I love this amplifier, it's also a very unique and quirky amplifier. I've done a couple of videos on my channel with this amp already, and each time when I use it, I'm like, wow, this amp is so unique. The frequency response, the dynamic response, it has a very interesting compression going on and sag, and it behaves very dynamically. So if you're doing palm mutes, for example, the entire amp or all the frequencies get louder than when you play open. So when you play open and very loudly, the volume starts to sag and duck away. And that behavior is very unique and interesting about this amplifier anyway, in my opinion and in my experience. So I think that this amp is really hard to model because of that. And in this series, I want to find out, you know, how close all the modeling platforms can get, how good all the amp models are that are based on the VH4, you know, and just have some fun comparing the real amp versus these modeling platforms. In this case, the Helix Stadium XL. Now, the settings that I'm going to use, again, is Channel 3 with bass at around 130, mids at around 1 o'clock, treble almost at 3 o'clock, and gain at, let's say, 230-ish, deep at 12 o'clock, and presence at, let's say, 2 o'clock. Those are basically kind of my favorite settings. For the comparison clips, I'm using my Edwards LP-CTM. And then later in the video, I'm also going to try this preset real quick with my Kiesel Aries Custom Joker Edition. Now, another thing that's going to be unique about this comparison series is that each time I use the real amplifier, I'm going to use my real speaker cabinet. So my Grossmann Fatbox ISO cab, loaded up with my trusty V30, the Celestion Vintage 30, made in China in 23, I believe. Just sounds really great. It's a great specimen. So that's all going to be real, like mic'd up with 3 mics, you know, my usual setup, 2 SM57s and 1 MD421 Kompakt. And then for all the modelers, I've shot an IR of this exact setup. Okay, so it's going to sound pretty darn close because of that. And we're going to see, you know, how the modeling platforms compare in the digital realm to a full analog rig, if you will. So this should be very interesting. Now I have to get all of the details out of the way, so bear with me before we get to the actual comparison. You might be thinking, cool, the Helix Stadium XL by Line 6, but it doesn't have any new Agora Diezel models. And that is correct. I'm going to use a legacy model, the Benzin Mega amp model. You know, the simple fact is that the Helix Stadium XL does not have any Diezel Agora models just yet, but I think that the older models sound pretty good, and this is what we have. And do keep in mind that the legacy models have also been upgraded a little bit in terms of the sound quality versus the older Helix hardware. And again, the more recent Helix amp models, you know, they hold up pretty well and they sound pretty great. Some of them sound really close to my real amplifier, so it should be pretty interesting to see how accurate these legacy models are with the new hardware versus my real amplifier. So the signal chain is very simple. The Edwards is going into the amplifier, and for the Helix, it's going into the Helix, you know. For the real amp, again, the amp is going into my Grossmann Fatbox 1x12 with the V30, with the 3 mics sent into the DAW. For the full mix comparison, which we're going to start with, which is very important in my opinion, there is a high-pass filter going on at 76 Hertz, and for the isolated comparison, I'm turning off the high-pass filter so that you can hear all that low-end goodness. Okay, let's go ahead and take a listen to the comparison. Check it out. right, interesting, right? So again, one quirky and unique thing about the real amplifier is that when you start palm muting, it's not just the low frequencies, those resonant low frequencies that, you know, start to get louder. No, the entire spectrum gets louder. So the mids and the treble region as well, which is not what the Stadium XL is doing. In terms of the level, the model in the Stadium XL is more linear, more flat, right? So level matching the two perfectly is not possible because of that, because the level just changes when you play palm muted versus with open notes, okay? Let's check out the isolated comparison. All right, so there's definitely a difference. I can't say that the Helix sounds bad. No, it sounds fine. I think that these amp models are great. They're a lot of fun, but they don't sound, or this one doesn't sound exactly like my real Diezel. Again, the quirky characteristics that this amp has are really hard to model, I think. We'll see, you know, for future episodes if other modeling platforms also have trouble emulating this amplifier and its quirkiness. So the differences that I'm hearing are like the amp model on the Helix Stadium XL sounds a bit more polished, a bit more normal. It doesn't have those weird, quirky, saggy compression dynamics going on, whether I play muted or open. You know, the treble response is different on the real amplifier. It's a little bit more sizzly up top, whereas the amp model just has more upper mids going on, rather. Now, some of that probably has to do with the difference in impedance curves, because when you load up an amp model with an IR block on the Helix Stadium XL, which is what I'm doing, of course, with the IR that I created of this setup, it's gonna grab a sort of standard impedance curve, probably a V30 cabinet or whatever. So that's probably going to cause for some tonal differences between, you know, the Stadium XL in this case and the real amplifier with my real cabinet, which is going to have a certain sound because of the impedance curve of my particular cabinet. It's probably on the subtle side for most people, but it's going to have a little bit of an impact on the bottom end response and the top end response. Okay, but yeah, the real amp just has a really interesting smeared sound. It sounds less saturated, but also more saturated in comparison to the Helix, depending on how I'm playing in that clip, right? So the dynamics are completely different. But still, I think that the amp model in the Helix Stadium XL sounds great. The DAS Benzin Mega, it's just not the same as my real amplifier. Whether that's a bad thing or a good thing, I don't know. I'll leave that up to you guys. Let me know in the comments what your thoughts are on the differences and which one you prefer. Do you prefer the quirkiness and the rawness of my real amplifier? Or do you, in this case, prefer the amp model with the IR. By the way, I should also mention that if you want my IRs of this speaker, you can check out my web store. I sell a bunch of IR packs on there, as well as capture packs and stuff like that. Now let's take a quick look at the preset that I created to try to emulate the sound of the real VH4. I took some time to dial it in and to get it as close as possible, and at a certain point I was just like, you know what, this is close enough. I just couldn't get it to sound closer, but I'll show you what I did, okay? So this is how it sounds. Even though it doesn't sound exactly like my real amp, when I'm playing it, I am getting that Diezel sound and feel. So, you know, it does have some of that in here for sure. It's just not exactly the same. So I cranked up the drive quite a bit higher than on the real amplifier, I would say, but I had to get some saturation in there. I think that the low-end mutes sound a little bit more dry. And again, a little bit more linear on the amp model. Bass is set to 6.6. I did lower the mids a little bit because the real amp sounded a little bit more scooped to me. Treble is up at 7.4, presence at 7.5. Again, not exactly the same settings on my real amplifier, but you know, I had to tweak it to sound close. I raised the level in order to compensate for the master volume being very low on the amp model. I don't need to emulate power tube saturation as the volume on the real amplifier isn't very high. You know, this is an amp that relies primarily on preamp distortion anyway. And sometimes with the Helix, it helps to make the models a bit more crispy in the top end. So that's why I lowered the master there. Deep is set to 5.4. And I didn't really change anything here. I raised the sag a couple notches, and that's it. And again, in the IR block, I have loaded up that V30 IR that I created of this exact setup. And yeah, so again, it sounds pretty awesome. So yeah, it's a very simple preset. And again, it sounds great. Yeah, and if you have this IR, then you can replicate this sound exactly. So it's a great sound. Again, not exactly the same as my real VH4, but you might enjoy the model more because it sounds a bit more polished and a bit more normal than my real quirky and weird amplifier that I do adore so much. Now, there might even be some differences between the amp that I'm using here versus the one that they modeled. I mean, this one has EL34s in the power section. Years ago, they did use KD88s or KD77s, or they switch power tubes around a little bit, depending on what, you know, sort of tubes are in supply right now at the factories and all that stuff. But EL34s are supposed to sound very close to KD77s anyway. So yeah, I really enjoyed this comparison. I'm not disappointed in the Helix Stadium XL because I do think it sounds excellent. But with this legacy amp model, the Helix is not able to replicate the quirkiness of my real VH4. All of that is probably going to change when the proxy cloning stuff arrives. So I can't wait for that. When the proxy stuff arrives, I'll definitely do another video where I compare this amp to a proxy clone. Now that is going to be fun and interesting, right? So let me know your thoughts in the comments down below because I'd love to know which amp modeling platform should I do next. Let me know. Also be sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons as that really helps the channel out. Follow me on Facebook and Instagram for additional content. And if you want to support this channel, you can get something like a Helix Stadium XL or Helix Stadium at my affiliate links for Thomann and Sweetwater. I'd really appreciate it as that really helps the channel out. Or get something in my web store like an IR pack or a capture pack, whatnot. All right, guys, thanks so much for watching and hope to see you soon. Cheers.